So science is supposed to be this grand human endeavor to understand our universe. But we don't really understand science, do we? I mean, there's too much of it. It's really complicated. You start off trying to sell people a story when you write a paper. You pretend that you do this one experiment, maybe 3 sub-experiments for it. They all work out first time. They give you a clear conclusion that this hypothesis is right, that hypothesis is wrong. You move forwards, everything's wonderful. Reality, nothing like that. You start off not knowing what you're doing, probably studying something else. You pick up on a couple of weird things in whatever you're studying. You do 17 different experiments, and all of them probably go wrong on the whole. At least maybe this is just my experience, I don't know. I'm hoping everyone else also had this experience. But basically, you try and make sense of all this conflicting data and decide that some things are due to contamination or whatnot. Anyway, at the end of this, you then try and tell people a very simple, basic thing that they might be able to understand. Now, this is not good science for several reasons. One is that it means that confused data it's not published, basically, which is really a shame because if you collect enough confused data together, you can often build a much stronger statistical picture than if you have one study that's very sure of itself, but that ignored lots of other studies that actually happened. But this is how people communicate. It's a good communication skill, and that's something that I would like to do with more science by using poetry, where you can use the very words themselves to try and get ideas across. I go into poetry for personal reasons. I think most people do. Specifically, in my case, you may possibly be able to detect this since my microphone is now switched on and is positioned here, which is rather close to my stomach, and I'm quite nervous at the moment. I have irritable bowel syndrome. About this condition, not much is known. Is it caused by the germs in my gut or a brain too fed up to talk sense to my stomach? Scientists flummoxed how yoga and yogurt both make it not so hurt, how antidepressants its essence has shown, but fibre can also work fine alone, or nothing. Sometimes I wish my brain could just leave this mess of a body, but its roots run too deep. There's a billion neurons nesting in your gut that interact with tens of trillions of bacteria, possibly more than all the other cells here. Consider these facts and see it's incredible that we find anything edible, that only 10% of us feel this resent when our stomach's pouring acid on infested intestines, our passages unpackaging the gloop we've ingested. It's hardly surprising. Digestive unrest increases our chances of feeling depressed. But for me, it's when this disease of my bowel won't abate late at night that excitement keeps me awake to write poetry. See, my inspirations are bowel irritation and sleep deprivation, so any gurgling sounds you hear are the oozings of ideas that arise from the writhe of my duodenum side, for between my gut and mind we find the source of this biological style. So why live in denial? It's far sweeter revealing what your gut is feeling in speech and in poem than in growl or gut groan. So, for the rest of you, may I suggest that you share your own syndrome? Thank you. This is Dirac. He united special relativity with quantum mechanics, but he says that science is about making difficult things simple. Poetry is to make simple things incomprehensible. He's not always wrong, but I would like to point out that I'm a spoken word artist. Now, this is important because it means you can't reread lines that I've said, so they have to be understandable first time or they were pointless. Also, I'm physically here, so you can talk to me after the show, and if it turns out that that profound sounding thing was actually just me trying to sound clever, you can punch me in the face. This is useful in terms of communicating science because you can use rhythm and rhyme to keep people's attention through complicated things. That being said, this next poem does also have explanatory diagrams. It's called Sea Anemone. Some cells see anemones as being their enemies, but several sorts of algae are hardly separate entities. They, in a process called endosymbiosis, live inside their hostess, closeness without protest, swapping their sweet sugars for the safe seats it delivers, protected by these toxic spines if they should need assistance. But this curious pedigree found inside the anemone goes another layer deeper. See, the algae all are Russian dolls that once ate other algae that hold chloroplasts, which in the past lived on their own. These now harmless creatures back then were known as cyanobacteria. and caused such hysteria when first they fouled the earth with this toxin that we call oxygen. Highly reactive. It found life, attacked it. The bodies piled higher till we learned to respire. What was waste was endorsed and was made a resource. Now we breathe these exhaust fumes and almost all consume food made by these awesome bacterial communes, because not all were digested. Some just arrested inside a cell, where in good health they still photosynthesize. Barely realize as feeder and fowler become one alga inside another alga, inside an anemone, and living in and around this could be a clownfish. And they're all trying to kill each other. Remember, these sea anemones don't dance purely by chance, and they're not plants. They're poison-stinging, paralysis or death-bringing animals. Only Nemo's immune to their sting harpoon. His mucus coat means he can gloat safe from predation, luring snacks into his own habitation, because phenomenally, this lemony green anemone seems cleaned by a nominally prey species, as they both breathe poison oxygen from within. It seems home is where you're immune to the neurotoxin. Thank you. Another thing that poetry tries to do is a campaign on social justice issues. I think, again, spoken word has an advantage here because you can hear when people believe what they're saying to you, and even if it might otherwise sound like a cliche, if you can hear that this is actually them not preaching but merely yearning for a change, you can realize why it has been worth repeating so many times. And science needs this sort of thing because it gives us so much more information about the consequences of our actions, but also allows us to make bigger actions, to do more harm or good in the world. So we need more conscientiousness. This poem is sort of about that. It's called Oceanic Nutrient Cycles. Imagine the ocean filled with glistening globules falling. This slow-mo downpour of snow serenely flows underwater, so I guess we ought to call it marine snow. And I guess you want to know, what is it? It's snot and junk and fishy gunk, gluey poo, dead plankton too. In tiny specks these things can float, but gravity grows as they too bloat, as bits stick to each sticky overcoat. This is the nutrient link that feeds the deep seas, a carbon sink, stronger than trees, but if nutrients sink, what feeds the heights? Plants need to drink in more than lights. Well, the rivers are givers, but this isn't enough. Some sun-shunning organisms dissolve falling stuff, but one grand brand of creatures dredges the deeps to ensure things don't stay down for keeps. The whale can go both high and low, and as swimming pools show, mammal poo often floats. So whales may vent pink fecal plumes, which plankton, algae then consumes, and a new place of life blooms on the map. Come fish, feast, here be whale crap, and their poo too falls and festers, broken down by microbe digesters. And it snows again. Christmas on the abyss below, too dark for any plant to grow. Then sailors became whalers, and with slow whale birth such travesty, this majesty near wiped off earth, and the fauna that adorn an ocean starve without this marvel's motion, for so valuable, it seems, is things like iron in their cack, that killing whales, though they eat these tiny krill, sets krill numbers back. Sea sharks and squid may find what food is hid nearby, but what slid down will not come back. If these creatures we attack, it's only a biodiversity disaster if we kill them faster than they can feed or breed. So an occupation that's all right in moderation is fishing. But several smaller fish are just as nutritious as one larger fish that makes a whole dish, but will cause the demolition of the fish and chip shop when the fishing just stops, because the larger fish take longer to grow, and there ain't that many left in the sea, don't you know? So, with whale-oiled algae, the whole sea, whole earth can feast, but the cycle only spins when the greatest serve the least. Thank you. What a lot of poets will also tell you that they can do is explain to you something about the human condition. I don't know what that is, but I'm fairly sure that if it is something, it's probably something that actually science is better placed to tell you about. Certainly you hear about cognitive biases, the strange limits on our perception, and things like that. But what poetry does do is draw our attention to the curious nature of what communication physically is. That we're using these words that you can play these strange games with to try and get an idea from one person's mind to another. And maybe that's as close as we can really get to knowing what it's like to be another person. This poem is called Rainbow. To celebrate our diversity, South Africa became the Rainbow Nation. There are a few problems with this. Black isn't on the rainbow. White isn't on the rainbow. Brown isn't on the rainbow. Pink is, no one's actual skin colour is on the rainbow. How can this be if a rainbow shows every type of light? Well, our eyes have 3 colour sensors, so can't tell a mix of blue light and green from the aquamarine that lies in between, but no red plus purple isn't myrtle. So you invent a colour. Magenta. Discover the rainbow is not enough. You must add pink. This prompts you to think. Things reflect the whole spectrum to different extents, and some colours don't exist if they get too intense. To find brown, tone things down, because the same light can look orange or yellow, like grey looks white, when the dimness around it makes it look bright. The amount reflected matters too. Look, what I'm trying to tell you is colour's complex, context dependent. Curiously hard to see how we can judge by the colour of skin, whatever kind of content lies within, when we can't even pick out from that shade the actual light waves overlaid. So when we talk of a rainbow of people or preferences, understand that our language has limited references because people don't fall on a line any more than they fit into boxes. A spectrum is too small an infinity to capture personality, so if you've dared to have a dream where real people can be seen because they know what eyes and words don't show, then you can find me somewhere over the rainbow. Thank you.